Interesting. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Corey. I am one of the program coordinators here with DailyX. We're so excited to be able to jump on in with Laura Allen tonight. We're going to be talking about permitted graywater systems and your home. We're so excited to be able to collaborate tonight with Sonoma-Marin Saving Water Partnership and also Greywater Action. A little bit about DailyX, if you are new to us. Our mission here is to create and inspire transformative action in order to create connected, equitable, and climate resilient communities. We do this through a three-pronged approach where we hope to really focus within our soil and swell out to our communities. We really focus on creating equitable actions of change, focusing on leadership policy and political advocacy. So within our leadership program, we have the Leadership Institute, which focuses on just and resilient communities, our youth leadership program, Eco to School, and our environmental health program. So, and today we're going to be partnering with Sonoma-Marin Saving Water Partnership with Lauren, and I'm going to give her an opportunity to introduce herself.
Great, thank you so much, Corey. Hi everyone, my name is Lauren Lum. I am a water use efficiency program specialist with Sonoma Water. And today I'm representing the Sonoma-Marin Saving Water Partnership. We are a partnership of 13 water utilities across Sonoma and Marin counties, and we are working together to provide programs and resources for water use efficiency. An example of one of the programs would be partnering with DailyX and Greywater Action to put on these webinars on graywater. We also have our website, savingwaterpartnership.org, where you can find drought tips for ways to save water during the drought and beyond, as well as a clearinghouse of information for all of the various rebates that are available. So if you're, for example, living in Sonoma and wondering what rebates are available to you, you can search on the Saving Water Partnership website for what's available in your area. And yeah, just a quick and brief overview of what we do. Thank you so much for having me, and looking forward to our presentation with Laura Allen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for your introduction. I really appreciate it. Being able to collaborate and network with other partners within our community is really important. You know, the first way that we enjoy, let me try to get here. Awesome. Is being able to connect with each other. So before we get started, these are just a few of the basic house rules. We'd love for you to continue to interact with one another within our chat box, as a few of you were doing. If you do have a question, we encourage you to please insert it in the Q&A and kind of get lost in the chat dialogue. But by the end of today's session, we're going to be answering all those questions within the Q&A. And for people that do message in the chat, make sure that it's set for everybody and not just the panelists, so that we're able to interact with each other. We also will be recording tonight's session. So if any of you are not able to save the full duration, do not panic or worry. We'll be sending a follow-up email with the recording, along with some of the resources that Laura is going to be sharing tonight as well. And without further ado, I would love to introduce Laura to all of you. Laura is one of the founding members of the Graywater Action Solutions, and has spent the last 20 years exploring low-tech water solutions. She has also authored the book, Water-Wise Home, How to Conserve and Reuse Water in Your Home and Landscape, as well as Graywater Green Landscape. She leads workshops and classes on graywater harvesting, graywater reuse, and composting toilets. She works diligently on policy and codes for water reuse systems in the Western US. And it is without further ado that we are able to welcome Laura today.
Thank you so much, Corey. Thanks for having me, and thank you everybody for coming tonight to hear about permitted graywater systems. If you could stop your screen share, and then I'll start my screen share. And for people who weren't at the other presentations, there's a lot of information about graywater, like general information that's true for all systems that I'm not going to talk about tonight. So I saw in the chat some of you are planning to go back and watch the other ones, and I encourage you to do that or look towards other resources so you can get the well-rounded view of graywater, which is this amazing resource, and there's lots of ways to do it. So I'm going to start my screen share, and then we'll get started. Let's see. And let me know, I'm just going to make sure my slides are advancing properly. So could you let me know if I'm moving forward? Great. And so we're lucky that everyone who lives in California is lucky because we do have graywater regulations, as do many states do allow graywater. I just wanted to start with kind of the big picture in our country. There's a lot of places that don't even have a definition for graywater. There's no pathway for people to have permitted systems, but California has had a pathway for a while. And all these blue states you see, just because they have an allowable kind of language, it doesn't mean you can actually easily get a permit. So tonight we're going to talk about California, just focusing in what systems require a permit, key protections in the code. We'll do some calculations, we'll do example permits, and then I'm going to share this concept called a standard plan. And I say California, I'm not saying Sonoma County, because graywater is regulated at the state level, and then there are sometimes counties usually don't make their own regulations, but they do interpret the state code, as do all the different cities. So I see people are calling in from various cities around Sonoma County and the Bay Area, and you're going to have a different experience going in to get a permit than other people on the call because you're in different jurisdictions. And so kind of the basic level is graywater legal? Yes, it is. You can get a permit. It's regulated in the state plumbing code. It's chapter 15, and this is where you'll go. I'm not going to do like tons of quoting from the code in tonight's presentation because it's very dense and it uses this really specific vocabulary that's not always accessible to many people, but I'm going to be interpreting what the code says for you and kind of giving you the digestible content that you'll need. And also I'll have some kind of sections from the code that you can go back and look. But if you want to read the code and if you're getting a permit, you should be familiar with the code because the person you're getting the permit from is going to be very familiar with it, or they'll look it up. If you're working with a builder, then you don't necessarily have to be reading the code, but you should be really aware of what you're required to do for your system. And I do want to give you just a little history. The graywater code in California has jumped around. In the past, it was in the appendix of a different department, then it got moved into the plumbing code in 2009. And that's when we being people who worked with graywater for a while, we say it's been legal. And it was legal before, sort of, but it wasn't illegal enough in a way that the average person could get a permit. Since 2009, it has been, in theory, the average person can get a permit following the plumbing code. And you can see that it's moved different chapters over the last 10 years. And so I'm noting this because your local jurisdiction might be using a previous iteration of the code, and they're pretty similar, but just know that if they're showing you something from chapter 16, that's because they're using the 2013 version. You'll still see people using chapter 16A, which is from a while ago, but currently it's found in chapter 15 of the plumbing code. So getting a permit in California, there are kinds of systems that don't need a permit. The previous webinar was about the Longita landscape system. That one does not need a permit. It's from your washing machine only. You're following guidelines. And then if you're in Santa Barbara County, which none of you are in, Santa Barbara County has made an allowance for one of the simplest graywater systems to also not require a permit. But basically everything else does. So any system where you're changing the plumbing, anytime you're adding an extra pump, or any system from a building that's over a single family. So if it's a duplex, you're in single family, or if you're just a one family home. But if you're in a building like a triplex or a quadplex or anything other than that, you do need a permit, even if you're just doing the laundry system. And so with most of these systems, I'm assuming that you guys are working in your single family home or your duplex, that style of house, not a bigger building. And so you need a permit because you're altering your plumbing and tapping in that way. So now you're going to be diverting gray water from your plumbing. So you have to have access to the plumbing. You have to be able to get below the showers and divert the water. The picture on the left, that shows a diverter valve. This is a crawl space. So you need a crawl space, or you need a basement or some way to get under it. Or maybe your home was plumbed for gray water, and so you actually have a gray water stub out or a separate line that was prepared during the construction of your building. And if you're doing a new construction, you always want to make sure the plumbing is constructed in a way that's really easy to then go and divert the gray water. You have a thing called a backwater valve, and that is just a one-way valve that goes into the gray water line right before it connects to the sewer. And in that, so if the sewer ever clogged and started backing up, the sewage could not back up and get into your gray water system. So that's just a protection to keep potential sewers from not contaminating your gray water system. You need access to this valve. You need an easy way to turn the system on and off. And so if you can't easily, physically get there really easily, you can add a motor. It's called an actuator, and that will just mount on the valve, and then you'll plug that into your house. Like usually it's in your bathroom or some convenient place for you to control it. So I'm going to talk about the most, I would say it's probably the most common kind of system that does require a permit. It's called a branch drain system. This is a gravity flow system. It comes from sinks and showers typically, though you could do this for your washing machine, though the other system, the longitudinal landscape, is easier to install and it's more flexible in what plants you can reach and irrigate, so it's not as commonly done. So in this picture, there's a shower bath. It has a crawl space. They've diverted the water in under the home, put in that valve. You can see the backwater valve is protecting the gray water side from that sewer connection. And now your water is flowing out by gravity. So this system works if your yard is lower than the plumbing. It's flowing out by gravity. You're branching the line, so you're splitting it into multiple sublines, which is dividing up the flow of water. You design it based on, you figure out how much water you produce in that per week in that shower, and then you look at your landscape and you figure out how much water the trees want, and then you adequately distribute the water so you're meeting the irrigation needs of your plants. So this is kind of the schematic, the overview. The system works really well if you have the right setup. It is time consuming to install, but it's not complicated. And there are no moving parts. There's nothing to break. It's a very robust and long lasting system. So if you're able to, this is a great system to look into. If able to, meaning it'll work for your setup. The permitting is also easiest for this system because it is so simple and straightforward, and there's not a lot to go wrong and not a lot of risks with this system. So it's gravity. So you need to have basic plumbing skills to be plumbing the pipe, make sure it's sloping properly. It's 2% grade, that's just standard plumbing. When you get to the splits, that's a place you keep that fitting level, and that way the water splits evenly, and then you have the rest of your system sloping down. This is kind of the most unique part of this system. It's a standard plumbing part, though it's not very common. It's called a double quarter bend or a twin 90 or a double L. I call it a flow splitter because it's splitting the flow of water. And that's what it looks like. It's just an EBS standard plastic fitting, and you run the gray water into it, and then it splits in half. So half the water goes out one side and half goes out the other. You can adapt it by making a little clean out in it. Sometimes if you're getting a permit, the regulators don't like you to modify the parts you're using. And so you might not be able to do that, but of course that would depend on your local regulator. And there's other ways to put clean outs in the system that doesn't modify the part. And here's kind of an example of how you might set this up. So this is a shower. It produces 140 gallons per week. And every time you're dividing the flow, it's going in half. And so you can see in this drawing, it's showing you that through these splits, each of these basins are getting 1/8 of the flow. And one is getting 1/4 of the flow, and then you figure out the fraction of the water. And so You can see, I'll start on the back, that hedge of bamboo is getting 70 gallons per week, but it's coming out in 4 different locations. And that's important to spread out the water so your basins don't need maintenance as frequently. It helps to prevent clogging of the landscape and prevent potential pooling of gray water, which is not allowed. So it's spreading out in 4 locations. It's going to that bamboo hedge. And then that bigger tree, that gets 1/4 of the flow. So that's 35 gallons per week. And then those 2 smaller trees are getting 18 gallons per week. So you can see how it can go to a few locations. This one is going to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I would say you don't really want to go farther than 8ths. It can get really challenging to get the whole thing working properly if you try to split it up more than 8ths. So after 8ths would come 16ths. Definitely would not recommend 32nds and probably not 16ths either. So try to find plants or plant new plants that are going to benefit by 8ths or less. And if how much water is going out, you might only split it into halves or quarters, depending on the usage in your home and what plants you're reaching. But that's one of the main limitations of the system, is it doesn't spread it out to a lot of locations. And here's another, kind of just showing you the parts. You can get a sense of what the system looks like, and if this is something you might do yourself or if you would hire somebody. You are always thinking about how to clean out clogs. So there's a clean out when you come out of the house. There's often clean outs throughout the system too. You can always use one of the outlets where the gray water comes out as a clean out too. You could put a snake up there or a hose and clean that out. But it typically doesn't have a lot of clogging problems, though of course, everything eventually might clog, and you want to easily be able to address that. So here's a picture. And for the people who were here before, this is a review. You can just see the basin. This is where the water is being soaked up. It's full of the wood chips. That's the filter. It catches all the lint and debris in the gray water, allows it to soak freely into the soil. The plants are planted adjacent to it, and then their roots will access that water. The basin will fill up to the top, that green lid. That's where you can access it. So that lid will open. There's nothing on the bottom. The water just flows freely through the air. That prevents clogging. It goes through the wood chips, that's the filter, and it can spread out into that basin. This picture is in San Francisco, so it's very sandy soil, so it's a small basin. If you're in, much of Sonoma County has clay, so if you're in clay soils, your basin will be bigger because clay soils infiltrate slower. And I'm going to talk more about how to size your basins in a little bit. So the other kind of system I'm going to talk about is a simple pump system. And so if you have any type of additional pump, that automatically triggers a permit. Just to overview the simplest pump system, you do have to divert the water, so you need access to your drainage plumbing. You put in your diverter valve, you run the gray water into this tank. It's small, it's usually about 30 to 50 gallons. It's called a surge tank. It's not storing gray water, it's just collecting it temporarily and then pumping it all out. Legally, you can only collect it for 24 hours. So you want to size it so it's going to empty at least once a day. There's an overflow going back to the sewer that has a backwater valve on it, again, to protect the tank from a potential sewer backup. There, you need to have some kind of vent to let air out of your tank. You need to have a place to plug in the pump. It just plugs into an outlet somewhere, and then you pump out into your landscape. Here's a picture. This one is in a basement. This one is outside the home. This is a common situation. If you have a small crawl space, you can get the pipes out, but there's nowhere to put the tank, so you have to bury it near the home. So you can see there's a lot of reconfiguring of the plumbing. This could be a do-it-yourself project, but you can see there's a lot of plumbing work. So if that's a skill that you don't have, you would definitely want to get professional help to make sure that all this is flowing properly. And this also will be inspected, so all the plumbing will need to be done up to snuff. Here's one in the crawl space. And then here's another one. So some people have a basement, and they might have a basement fixture or a basement laundry system, and they need to pump out of the basement. So this is a product called a SaniFlow, and this is a really super easy installation. It's just a very small unit that's designed for people who have to pump out of their basements. And if you need to do this for your laundry system, this does trigger a plumbing permit, but you can, the actual installation is quite simple because this is all pre-packaged and you just run it into this little unit and then it pumps it out. And then you'll be doing the conventional like laundry to landscape irrigation side. Just one example, if people are interested in pump system, there's a lot of pumps out there. This one is totally suitable. There's lots of suitable pumps, but I wanted to give you one brand. And there is a big long list in the code of, if you have a tank, the requirements, and it's pretty straightforward, being watertight, being durable, being vented, being sealed against vermin, having an access for removing the pump or potential cleaning. You have to label it, gray water system, caution unsafe water, overflow, kind of basic stuff like that. And then for any of your pump systems, the simplest way to use the water is you're sending the water out through the system like the laundry to landscape. It's 1-inch tubing, it's 1/2-inch outlets. The filtration happens in the landscape in the mulch by your plants in your mulch basins. There are other pump systems that would need a permit too that do filter the water. I saw someone mention Hydroloop, which is a system that sends the water indoors that they're trying to launch in the US. I don't think it's been installed in the US yet, but they're coming from, from Europe. So there's definitely these manufactured systems that are made to do filtered gray water through drip or for indoor. And those of course need a permit too. The specific questions that your agency will want to see are going to be a bit different. So I'm going to start with kind of the basic stuff that you'll have to show any agency anywhere pretty much for all systems. And then I can give you the best knowledge I have for a more complex system. But that again, it just varies so much who you're talking to and where you live, that it's hard to answer in a general way. So I'm going to start by who enforces the code. So in the code, it says the authority having jurisdiction or the enforcing agency. And who this is up to some interpretation based on your local regulators. Typically, can you advance? There, typically it's the building department. They'll want a plumbing permit. So pretty much everywhere, the building department is going to feel like they're the authority having jurisdiction. The Graywater code is in their plumbing code. They should give the permit, which I agree with. That's pretty straightforward. You'll also find that sometimes the county environmental health department, they're the ones in charge of septic systems or any on-site wastewater system. They also say, well, we're in charge of wastewater. We should have authority too. So sometimes you have communities where they also want to give a permit. And then public health says, well, this is non-potable water. People are using it. This is a potential health risk if it's not been done properly. We want to be in charge too. We want to be the authority having jurisdiction too. And no county or city is going to argue with any of these other departments if they want to enforce, because it logically makes sense. So you find some communities where you have to get 3 permits for even a simple gray water system. And what that means is no one is going to get a gray water permit because it's so expensive. So it's definitely a big problem if in your community, multiple departments want to be the enforcing agency. The best case scenario is they've talked, they've agreed, they've talked about potential risks, and they agree, building department, if people follow the code, all of our concerns are addressed. So you guys just make sure they follow the code. And that's really the best case scenario. So I have never heard of anywhere in Sonoma County where multiple departments have wanted to enforce, but in Santa Cruz, that's really common. It definitely is common around the state, but I've never heard of it in Sonoma County. So if you encounter that, I'm sure Lauren will help, or somebody, or Daily Axe. If you're in the county and you're not in the city, then you will be getting your permit through the environmental health department of the county, probably. Well, actually, I shouldn't say. Then you might just be getting it through the building department for your county.
Yeah, so for the county, if you're in an unincorporated area, you'd be getting your permit through the PRMD, the Permit Resource Department. And then for Sonoma County folks, we do the only regulation where you'd have to get a permit is through your building department. So you don't have to go through county environmental health or public health.
Great. So going on. So now you want to ask yourself, should you build the system yourself or hire someone? And if you're a homeowner, you can get the permit and you can do the work yourself. That's definitely allowed. So you can do this if you can do it, like physically, technically, or competently do the system. So you can get your own permit, you can do the work yourself. If you want to hire somebody, who you're going to hire is a landscape contractor. So you have to hire a contractor because this system is going to cost more than $500. I shouldn't say that. If your system costs less than $500, you can hire a handy person. If it costs more, you're going into California contract law and you have to hire a contractor. The most kind of suitable contractor is a landscape contractor because most of your system is in the landscape. They often work in partnership with the plumber because sometimes there's major plumbing rerouting. Sometimes it's really simple, just a little put in that valve, but there is plumbing work involved. So look to a landscape contractor who's trained in Graywater. And plumbing contractors also, if you're doing an indoor system, like for the person considering HydroLoop, that's all indoors. So that would be like a plumbing contractor would be involved in that system, not a landscape contractor. A general contractor, if 3 trades are employed, could also be a Graywater installer. You're doing a little plumbing, there's some landscape contracting, you might do a little wiring to put in that actuator. So general contractors also fit into this. And then lastly, there's a general engineering contractor, a specific kind that also can install Graywater systems. This was a little bit of a challenging talk to prepare because I'm not sure where you're all going with this. And the code is just very dense. There's so many details. So I hope that I'm kind of hitting the mark of being broad, but also specific enough. So if people want to type in questions, things like that, either slow me down or speed me up, please do, because I'm not sure what's going to be useful to you. But I'm going to start with some general protections in the code. So the first thing is protecting human health. Graywater is not potable if you do it wrong. If you get it mixed into drinking water, that's a health risk for sure. So the code, it prevents human contact with this non-potable source. It prevents pooling. You don't want puddles of Graywater. Someone could contact it. Pooling also can breed mosquitoes. That's called a vector. You don't want that. So there's all these ways that the code is just basically protecting human health in really simple and important ways. Hazardous inputs. You don't want to put hazardous materials into your Graywater because now it's going in your yard. And the last one is the cross-contamination of potable supply. So that's the biggest one. Nobody wants you, by not understanding, not doing it right, pumping dirty water into your neighbor's drinking water supply. That's like the worst case scenario. So there's lots of protections in the code that would never allow that to happen, so long as you're following the code. The next protection is the environment. So Graywater could harm the environment if it's used improperly. The main way is Graywater contains nutrients. Putting nutrients in your garden, that's called a fertilizer. That's a good thing. But if you're putting nutrients into a waterway, that's pollution. So the code is preventing runoff. It's keeping Graywater on your property. It has setbacks, so it's protecting wells and waterways from Graywater being too close to where it could get in without being cleaned. The majority of the cleaning happens as it flows through the soil, as in a septic system. The soil is the way Graywater is cleaned. In your residential Graywater system, a lot of it will be used by your plants because you're designing it to irrigate. But if some of it makes it through and your plants don't use it, it's being purified as it goes through the soil. But it's not cleaned enough if you're too close to like a waterway, a creek, a river, a drinking water well. And then also preventing the hazardous inputs. That is not good for us or the environment. So just want to call your attention to the adoption matrix. This is the very first page of the chapter. And I'm really not going to go over this, but I just want you to know it exists because there's different agencies. You guys who are in a residential situation, you're regulated by HCD, which is the Department of Housing and Community Development. They are in charge of the plumbing code, which is over residential homes. And they haven't adopted the entire chapter. So if you look at that little HCD, HCD1 is like a house. So you're in that HCD1 column. And if you go down there, the X is for adopt entire chapter as amended. And then there's the X, there's a little X for all the sections of the code they have adopted. And I just want to point to one that sometimes causes there's a misinterpretation and it can cause an issue. in 1501.1.11.2.4, that's not adopted by HCD1. And that section of the code says that your system has to have an annual inspection. So if somebody were to just open up the Graywater code and start reading, they would read the section that says an annual inspection is required. And they might say, oh no. And if you're a building official and you don't look at all these details, I mean, their book is giant. They might not check this out in detail. They might say, oh, these systems have to be, they have to have an annual inspection. Or if your contractor reads that, they might think that. And it hasn't been adopted, so it's not applicable. I just want you to call your attention to that in case you ever come into a situation where somebody didn't notice that and is asking you to do something that you're not required to do. Okay, so back to some general stuff. These are requirements for any graywater system in the code, so it's kind of the first section. You have to design your system with a diverter valve, so a way to send the water back. You can't put in like poopy diapers. So if you are doing a laundry system, you can do a laundry system, but if you're going to wash poopy diapers, you have to turn it off. No hazardous chemicals. So that's where the code is directing you to manage your inputs. There's no spray irrigation allowed, no ponding, no pooling, no runoff. Your outlet where the graywater comes out has a 2-inch cover. That's to prevent contact. You have to have a maintenance manual. So that's to help keep that education throughout the life of the building. So if you move, if you sell your home, the next person inherits a graywater system, and they also need to inherit good instruction so they can make sure it works properly. And then your system can't be connected to any potable supply without adequate protection. That's a really important one. And this only comes into play with the more, the systems that have filters or indoor systems where they are using potable water to backflush filters or to make up water if it runs out of graywater. So it's not really applicable to the branch drain. Well, it's not at all applicable to the branch drain, and the simple pump system doesn't have any connection either. So in the code, there are a couple of types of systems. There's the washing machine system that doesn't need the permit. I talked about that. And then in the code, the language they use, it's called a simple system. So basically, simple system just means any system under 250 gallons per day from any graywater source. And it does need a permit unless you live in Santa Cruz County. And then the complex systems, this just means it's over 250 gallons a day. It's not actually any different other than the flow of the water. So if you're looking in the code, you're going to notice these terms. The code also talks about the minimum water quality. So if you're doing graywater for irrigation, you don't need any water. There's no minimum water quality requirements. You don't have to treat the water. You do, of course, have to think about filtration for clogging. We use the mulch in the landscape that prevents clogging of the soil, but it's a very low maintenance type of system, and it works really well. If you're going to do an indoor system, or you want to do something, anything indoor, you do have to manage the water quality, and you have to treat it to NSF 350 standards. So that's a certification. So you would need to be purchasing a system or working with an engineer. It's kind of a whole other world, and they do have water quality requirements. So I'm going to go back to the diverter valve just for a minute. There is really specific, there's a very specific location you have to put it, which is part of the code, as well as making sure your system functions really well. It has to be accessible, indicate direction of flow. It's downstream of traps and vents. And then you have to have the backwater valve anytime your drain is subject to backflow, and it has to be installed before you connect into the building sewer, and it has to be accessible. So those are just kind of basic stuff about where you put it. I'm going to skip this one. I won't. I already talked about how you can't have unprotected connection to water supply. So this is only for the indoor systems or systems that have makeup water. There's 2 ways that you can protect the water, and what's allowed depends on your jurisdiction. They might want you to have an air gap. They might allow you to use an RP valve, but it depends on where you're at. And that's only for people doing the filtered systems with makeup water or indoor. So now there's a bunch of the code that is designed to prevent groundwater contamination. Well, I shouldn't say a bunch. There's several parts that want to make sure that you don't put your graywater too close to the groundwater. So you can't discharge if you have, you need to have at least 3 feet separation between the top of the swale and where the groundwater is. And if you don't know exactly where the groundwater is, that can be hard to prove. You're at least 3 feet away. The code does allow you to just dig a 3-foot hole to show that there is no water seeping into your hole. So that can be, if your regulator wants proof, you can show that by actually physically, it's like a physical proof. Or maybe you have information about groundwater in the area, but it would kind of depend on what they want to see. But the code does call out you can show this by a test hole. In the winter, maybe you have high groundwater in the winter, you would need to shut off your system to make sure you're not using it when it's too wet. And then the setbacks, that's another way to prevent water contamination. So now we're going to get into some calculations, and the calculations in the code are designed to prevent pooling and runoff. So there's a kind of a bunch of, there's like a series of calculations that you do, and the overall like reason to doing this is to make sure you size your system properly so you don't put too much gray water in too small of a location. So the first thing you have to do is figure out how much gray water will be generated. Then you need to know your soil type, and then you need to calculate the infiltration area. And the code has a specific way you have to do this. So we'll do the code method for estimating gray water flow. So the code gives you 3 options. It says you can use water use records, like your actual house, how much water you use, local numbers for daily per person interior use, or the code procedure. I have never seen anyone do 1 or 2 or allow 1 or 2 to be done. It's always the code procedure. So if you're getting a permit, just be prepared to just go straight to number 3, the code procedure. And just to remind you, gray water has to be discharged daily. And not all water has to be used. You can divert excess to the sewer. So if you find out you produce a lot of water, you don't have to use it all. Though this is typically not an issue in a residential gray water system. Okay, so here's the code number. So you need to know the number of occupants, and that's based on bedroom. So the first, if it's a 1-bedroom house, that has 2 people. Any additional bedroom, you add a person. This has nothing to do with how many people actually live in the house. It's just the stated bedrooms, like your listing of your house. Is it listed as a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom or a 4-bedroom? And then you find the occupants. Then to estimate the gray water flows, the code says showers, baths, and wash basins are 25 gallons per day per person. And laundry is 15 gallons per day per person. And you might be thinking, well, I'm giving you a lot of info. If I let you pause for a minute, you might be thinking, I have a really efficient laundry machine. It only puts out 12 gallons per day. Does the code think that I'm going to do more than a load of laundry every single day, every single person in my house? And that is, yes, what the code is saying. These numbers are extremely outdated and they create a very enlarged, kind of unrealistic situation. But this is what we have right now. Hopefully soon we won't, because they're super old numbers. So basically you just multiply how many occupants by the numbers they give you, and that's how much gray water. So we're going to do I'm going to skip this example because we have a couple examples below. And just to note that these numbers are, super outdated, like I mentioned, and there is a great new study that was done a couple years ago that has found that, wow, we've gone down a lot in our average usage. And so hopefully with, it usually takes a couple of code cycles to get these changes in place, but hopefully in a very near code cycle, this will get updated to match the kind of 2020, whenever it'll be, new code that comes out. The flow rates are quite different than they were in the late 90s. So according to the code, how much laundry gray water is produced from the people in a 3-bedroom house? So 3-bedroom home, that's gonna have 4 people, and then you multiply it by the laundry. And then what about from the shower of 1 person living in a 4-bedroom house? So 4-bedroom house, that's got 5 people. You multiply that by the 25 gallons. So you can see that these numbers, especially when you get like 1 person in a 4-bedroom house, is very unrealistic. And the important thing about this that is important to consider is that if that 1 person moves or sells their home, they have a 4-bedroom house, so a lot more people might move in. So the system should be sized to accommodate the home, not necessarily the person living in there right now. So that's good. The challenge is that you don't want to design your irrigation based on the code numbers. So I'll show you a quick example of that. So let's say a 3-bedroom home, this is the code. From the shower, you produces 100 gallons per day. That's what you'd be putting on your permit application. And now let's think about our plants for a minute. I'm not really going to talk about plants in this talk, but I want you to think about it. So weekly, that would be 700 gallons. So if we did our calculations that you learned about in the last week's webinar, you'd find out that one apple tree needs about 32 gallons per week. And so the system could irrigate about 20 trees. And you might be thinking, wow, I can irrigate like this whole little orchard I planted. But don't think that yet, because you actually have to do your actual estimates. So let's say we want to find out what the real production is. This is interviewing the people who live in the home, interviewing yourself and your family, and finding out how much gray water you produce. Let's say there were 2 people in this house, and they actually were very water efficient. They had efficient fixtures on their shower heads, and they didn't take long showers. They produced 20 gallons a day together. So that weekly would be 140 gallons. How many trees could they water? So that could only irrigate about 4 or 5 trees. So you do need to do this code method because that's for your permit. You also need to do the real method, like real being how much water you're truly producing, because that's what your plants are going to get. So these kind of go in tandem, but they're really disconnected from each other, though they're going to both influence your design. So I hope that is clear. So now we're going to stick with the code production now, because we have to use this to size our basins. So this is for the permit. If you're doing the laundry system, you don't have to do any of this. You only use the real numbers, like how much you really produce in your home, to accommodate your plants, and you size your basins accordingly. For the code, you're sizing your basins based on the code procedure. There is a table in the code, and it has different soil types. You have to know what soil type it is. And this is another kind of point of challenge. It can be getting a permit, is the inspector, or whoever's giving you the permit, they have to feel confident that you've identified the soil type properly. Some of them accept a site-based test. It's with 5 minutes of training, all of you could assess your soil. It's not hard at all. You just need a little chart, some water, 1 page of instructions. It's really simple. So you definitely can find out what soil type you have, but the local inspector might not accept that. I don't know that. Sometimes they do, no problem. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes you can mail your soil in. There's a pretty low cost test. It's called a soil textures test. I believe it's like $25. It's really not very much. So if your jurisdiction wants some kind of official something to show soil type, you could use that. That would be the next best thing. But if they want you to use like a soil engineer, that's really expensive. And so that's really not feasible for most people. So we want to have cities give affordable options, like either a site-based test or a mail-in test, because both of those are very accessible to people. So now we know our soil type. So let's say we have sandy loam. This is the example there. This chart is a little bit confusing, and it just is. It's in the code, and you have to work with it, and as well as your regulators, they work with this. But there's two sides of the chart, and the first column is just if you happen to make exactly 100 gallons. Sometimes you don't, so you usually are using the second column. With the second column, you just divide by that coefficient, and that's going to give you your square foot. So with the example, that's 60 gallons in sandy loam. So you put 60 gallons, you divide by the coefficient, which is 2.5, and that gives you your square feet. Is that making sense? Okay. You only have to do this if you personally are filling out your permit. If you're working with someone, they have to do it. So if you're not planning to do this yourself, you can just kind of sit back for a minute and ignore this chart. But that's what you have to do for your permit. Some areas have just said, we have so much clay in our community, we're just going to say assume clay and use 1 for your coefficient. And that's great. It's really easy. It's conservative, because if they happen to have sandy or soil, then it's not going to hurt them. They'll just have to dig more, and it makes it a lot easier. So some jurisdictions just say, assume it's this, or if you don't want to assume that, then send it into a lab if you are sure your soil is different. So that's an option. And so square feet, you might be wondering, like, what on earth does square footage of a basin mean? So what that means, it's the footprint of your basin. So you have a cumulative number that you have to show for your permit. And so each basin is going to have a fraction of that. So this example basin, it's a foot wide and it's 8 feet around. So this particular basin is 8 square feet. So if you had to get up to, I don't know, maybe you had to have 40 square feet for your total system, then you would have this, you'd have another tree, another tree, another tree. Or maybe you would make this one 2 feet wide if you actually needed more capacity. So maybe you didn't have that many trees, so you needed to have each basin be bigger. You could just dig this basin wider to gain capacity. So the next thing is setbacks. So this is where you can locate your basins, where you can send your gray water. You do need to note setbacks on your application. So when you have your plans, you're going to note anything that you have to have setbacks from. So the plan checker can see that, oh, there's a creek in this neighborhood. And look, they're like 500 feet away from the creek. Or maybe you don't even have to note it if it's not on your property. But let's say you have a creek on your property and you're 200 feet away. So note that you're 200 feet away from that creek, because they want to see those things that you need to be paying attention to. Your property line is a great one. And then also make sure you're locating your basins out of your setback limitations. And you might have to call out, like, from this basin to the property line, that's 10 feet or that's 3 feet or whatever it is. So the person looking at your permit can see that you know what the setbacks are and that you know that you're meeting them. So here's the chart of the setbacks. And you are in the subsurface and subsoil irrigation field and mulch basin part. So that's the one you're looking down, and there's several of the superscripts. So you need to notice those, like the building structures, the property line one. The property line one is often used. That's 5 feet, except the superscript 8 says the distance shall be permitted to be reduced to 1.5 feet for drip and mulch basin irrigation systems. So you want to be very familiar with this chart. And sometimes the inspector might just glance at it and say, you're supposed to be 5 feet, and look, you're only 2 feet. So you have to say, yes, that's true. And because of, I'm doing a mulch basin system, so I actually can reduce to 1.5 feet. So it's good to be familiar with these details, because your inspector, they may not notice, because again, they have their code, the codes that they're responsible to know are vast, and this is very minute. Something else, gray water systems have to be marked a certain way. If they're pressurized, so the gravity flow systems don't have to be marked, but any pressurized system has to be marked every 5 feet. And gray water distribution upstream of connection to irrigation has to say caution on potable gray water, do not drink. And that means if you're running like gray water into your crawl space before you get into the landscape, that's where you're irrigating. Sometimes you get a jurisdiction that just kind of asks for some slightly unreasonable things, like the city of Los Angeles, for some unknown to anyone reason, ask people to label all of their buried pipe. So this is pipe that's usually used for sewage. This is drainage plumbing. It's buried, and they want you to label it. So it's almost comical, because like what is someone going to do if they don't know that's gray water? They're going to think it's sewage. They're not going to like tap into it for drinking. But the code doesn't say you have to do that. But sometimes jurisdictions will, for their comfort, for whatever reason, they'll ask for something more. You do have to label above ground piping. So I'm going to show you some examples from permits. In the code, you need to have a site plan. It can be hand-drawn, it can be computer-drawn. It needs to show all of these things that I've been talking about, like the setbacks, the size of your basins, make sure you're cumulatively accommodating enough of the water. It should show where things are located. Some jurisdictions it doesn't have to be like perfectly to scale, so it can generally show what's happening. Others might want you to show more to scale, and that does vary on who you're talking to. Just the picture on the left, this is a hand-drawn system that was accepted. These are all from real permits, accepted gray water permits from either the Bay Area or from Los Angeles area. So you can see the picture on the left is very simple. Again, it's hand-drawn, but it's showing how the water's flowing, where the basins are, how the distance to the property lines. I don't think there's anything else that needed to be shown for setbacks. The distance on the right, the image on the right, that's a computer-drawn site plan. So you can see the basins, the property line, the building. It's noting a couple of things from the code that needs to be complied with. Here's another site plan. This one's kind of a mix. Like a lot of people, if they've had their home either majorly remodeled or new construction, they'll have, or you will have, whoever's doing it will have drawings of the home. So you can use that. You can plop little, arrows with the things you're going to use. This installer just has little pictures of the valve, and this had a pump basin in it. So they're just pointing where they are in the actual drawing of the home. And then they have their own drawing for the irrigation side. So this was from another permit. And some areas, this is all the information you have to provide, a site plan. Others want an irrigation field detail. So this is just showing more in detail where the water is going. So you may or may not have to provide this, but it's definitely within reason to really show, so they looking at your drawing can see more in detail what's going on, showing the materials and a little more of the distances and that kind of information. So this is an example of that. A riser diagram. This is another common thing, though not all jurisdictions will ask for that. If your system is out of the branch drain scale, if you're anything getting more complex, they all will want to see more information. But if you have a simple branch drain system, your area may or may not want to see a riser diagram. But what it is, it's just showing simply how you're changing the plumbing. The picture on the left actually has a pump in it. So it's showing where the cleanouts are, where the backflow preventer is, where the backwater valve, where the tank is, where the pump is, where the water is flowing. The drawing on the right, this is showing a gravity flow system. So it's just showing what fixtures are being tapped into, where the valve is, where the backwater valve is, and then where the gray water is going. So it's quite simple, but that's so the person looking at your permit can see what you're doing with the plumbing. Here's another one. This can also be hand drawn. This was drawn by a plumber who is trained in, these are called isometric drawings. So I don't know how easy it is to hand draw these if you're not trained, but I think it's probably possible, especially if you're handy at drawing. So it's not, you don't have to, the code doesn't say these have to be computer drawn, they just often are. But I just wanted to show you, here's the picture on the left. This is the plumbing that the drawing on the right is showing. So it showed what was there and then the alteration that was made to put in the gray water system. And here, this is the same system, the same permit for the same system. This was the site plan that was showing where the gray water is flowing, the basins. You can see there's a little sizing showing the size of all the basins on the site plan. So you can show that cumulatively the basins add up to what they're supposed to, and showing where the water's flowing. And this is a little blurry, but the setbacks are also noted on this. So I'm getting to the end and then we'll have questions. I'm wondering what you guys are thinking of this, if it's too much or not enough. So there is this concept called a standard plan. And what this is so kind of backing up, the code there's a lot of details in the code and they're not applicable to all systems. So sometimes it can be very overwhelming to know, like, what do they actually want me to show them? They being the authority having jurisdiction, like your people giving you the permit, like what do they actually want to see? And sometimes if they haven't given gray water permits, they may not know what they want to see. So that can be really challenging because you don't know what to give them. They don't know what they want. It can take a lot of time and waste a lot of time. And so a standard plan is a plan that the building department has sat down with whoever is needed to be there. Maybe they just do it on their own. Maybe they sit down with a couple of gray water installers and they look at the code and they look at common systems and they say, well, this is what we actually want to know. And so we're just going to make this form that people literally just fill out. And it sounds so, so much like common sense, and it is, but it's not there. Like they don't have it given to them. They actually have to make this, which can be challenging with limited resources and just so many things on their plates. So this can be a great thing to do with your cities, is to create a standard plan. Sometimes a city will do it with a gray water permit. Like if they haven't given a gray water permit, this can be getting a real permit, going through the process, documenting it, checking it over, and then having it ready for the public. So that's the concept. And there's a bunch of cities who have done this. So I just want to show two, just to give you an idea. City of Oakland did this. This was from a while ago, the very first Graywater Code, the chapter 16A. So you'll see that's mentioned. And so this is what they want to see. And if you fill it out, comply with it, you have your permit. So it really streamlines the process. They want to know the obvious, like where this is, the owner's name, description, basic description of the project. Then you show your calculations, your number of bedrooms, your number of occupants, and then you do that multiplication. So you have that. And then in Oakland, there's a lot of clay in Oakland. So they said, let's just assume you have clay. We'll use 1 square foot per gallon. That means you don't even have to do math. It's just whatever gallons you're putting out, that's the square footage. Assume that. And if you don't want to assume that, you can mail your soil into a lab. So that's really easy. In the standard plan, they have that chart. So people don't have to be like thumbing through this giant code chapter. It's everything that you need to use is in the standard plan. And then you find your minimum irrigation field size. Then they have a checklist of all the things you need to be sure you're doing when you install it. And the inspector can check for all those things when they inspect your system. It's a one-time inspection. So it's just after you get your permit, after you've installed the system, you install it, they check it, then you kind of finalize it, but you don't have to go in. Some areas want you to get your plan approved first, and then you go build it, and then they come inspect it. So there is a lot of variation from city to city. But Oakland is just one visit. So that's Oakland. And then you do have to show your site plan, just basic site plan where things are going. This is for the simple gravity system. This is not for pump systems. I want to clarify that. And it's often good to start with the simplest system, and then you can work your way up to get the more complex ones. Los Angeles, they also have one. They have this, I'm going to go through this really quickly. They have a whole bunch of information about the system, what's exempt from a permit, what's not. Then they have their standard plan. So they have all the stuff that they want to see. There's checklists again, like, does it have a site plan? Did you show where the graywater system is? Did you show the setbacks? So you really know really explicitly what you have to put on your plan. And if you put all that, it's going to be really easy to get your permit. The same thing, they have the calculations, how to size the basins. Then they give you where to draw. They want a rising diagram for all the systems, and they give you some examples. And just ending, the maintenance and inspection. So pretty much all of these systems are going to be inspected at least once, though some will want to approve your plan first and then inspect. The maintenance lies on the property owner, so that requires you to have an operation and maintenance manual, and some inspectors will want that to be attached to your permit. So you can use, there's examples of them, but you do have to adapt it based on your specific system to put in, like, this was designed for this amount of flows, this is where the basins are. You do have to customize it to match your system. And then when they inspect it, some systems, like if it has any indoor, if it's an indoor system, it's going to have cross-connection inspection and testing, making sure the whole system, there's just a much more to it. For the other systems that are just going outdoor, they want to see the water flowing. They want to see seams and joints are exposed. Sometimes they'll allow you to bury straight lines of pipe. You do want to ask about that ahead of time. They're going to check to make sure everything is, watertight that's supposed to be watertight, and that everything kind of flows out. Sometimes they won't inspect under the house. Sometimes they want to see a picture. Sometimes they will crawl under there. There's a lot of variation on what actually happens in the inspection, but usually they just for sure want to see the water flowing through the system. And I'm going to stop there for questions and comments.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was fantastic. I know for me personally, I feel so grateful that I was able to attend those previous webinars that you hosted. And I feel relieved to know that there are actually a lot of similarities between a simple laundry landscape system and this. I imagine the soaps are pretty similar. You need to avoid the boron, borax, chlorine, and sodium. And I actually had a quick question before I dive into some of the Q&A for folks as we sit and pause and think about what we still want to ask you. For the mulch basins, are you still using the same ball valves?
It depends on what kind of system you have. If it's a branch drain, there are no ball valves because there's no pressure. It's just flowing out by gravity through larger pipe. Yeah, there's so many details I did not cover. But if it's a pump system, a simple pump system, then it would be the same. Yeah.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions between the chat and the Q&A about this HydroLoop system. What's your experience with this system, and are you able to elaborate a little bit more on what its functionality is?
Sure. HydroLoop is a company from the Netherlands who are opening up in the US. So they have a US office. They don't have any installations yet in the US. So they're launching now. They are NSF 350 certified. So they're certified for indoor toilet flushing. I have never seen one in action. So for me to assess the system, I like to see them working for at least a year, and then I'll tell you what I think. After 1 year of operation, I'll give you my opinion. Without having seen one in operation ever, and especially not for 1 year, I can't speak to how much maintenance does it need, how robust is it, because yeah, I have not seen it, but it is a emerging system in the market. It's for indoor, so indoor Graywater this is my kind of overall take on indoor Graywater. It definitely has a place in larger scale commercial buildings. There's a lot of water, there's not a lot of landscape. Indoor systems are more complex. They take a lot more maintenance. There's, just a lot more that can go wrong because they're a more complex piece of, technology. For a residential person to manage that's definitely a lot. And historically, there's been several companies in the past that have tried that have failed. It's just hard to do. And most residents do have a landscape, and it's so much easier to use Graywater outdoors for irrigation. And so if you are irrigating, use your Graywater to irrigate. If you don't have any irrigation at all or very little, that's when you could consider like an indoor system where it might make sense to consider. It's also, rainwater is very much cleaner than Graywater, so it's much easier to get rainwater into your toilet technically than Graywater into your toilet. So that's another thing, is just to really take a step back and look at your whole system. Like, why are you doing this? What are your options? And then you might find an indoor system is going to be a good match in certain situations.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. We have Karen wondering about pump requirements and permit requirements. Does an outside pump require a permit? For example, rainwater storage to irrigation?
Yeah, so there's a code for rainwater. I think it's chapter 17 now. I'm not sure. Actually, I forget. Things have moved around a little bit in the last couple of years. And if your system is under 5,000 gallons and it's a stable tank, you don't need a permit as long as you're not adding a pump to it. So once you add a pump to it and you're pressurizing non-potable water, you do need a permit. Mm-hmm. So most rainwater systems backyard don't need a permit, but if you are going to pressurize your water, you do. And maybe Lauren knows more about permit requirements for that.
No, that's what I know as well.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Peter is asking about our experience with permitted systems in the city of Santa Rosa. Have systems been permitted? Any surprising demands? Well, Peter, one thing that I've been finding, for one, our municipalities and our city websites have an abundance of resources to help us figure out what processes are needed in order to get a permit. I'm pretty positive in the city of Santa Rosa that they do require an engineered design to be submitted. But what we can do is we can fact check that and we can send a resource in our follow-up email. Thanks for the question. I'm sure people are still processing the abundance of knowledge that has just been shared and are waiting for Q&A. We still have some additional time for folks who do have questions. Donna, I just noticed that you raised your hand. Let's see, I might go rogue and see if we can unmute Donna here. If I can find her, let's see. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Donna, I accidentally just muted you right when you started to talk. If you want to unmute yourself.
Okay,
there you go.
Okay, great. I just want to comment that Laura is such a pioneer. Even though it's been possible to do these for a while now, I'd be curious just of a little bit of your story, Laura. Like, how did you get into this? You're so professional. You're so detail oriented, and you're really demystifying it for all of us. So I'm so grateful. You know, it's not as daunting knowing that somebody like you has figured a lot of this out. So thank you.
Thank you so much for those kind words. I appreciate that. When I started doing Graywater, it was in 1999, and there wasn't really a legal pathway. So all of my systems were pre-legal, but it just made so much sense. Like, why are we wasting this water? I didn't know anything about building codes. I was taking a plumbing class, and I lived in Oakland, and my plumbing teacher was also an inspector for the city of Oakland. And he was like kind of horrified. I'd be like, raise my hand and ask these questions. And he's like, what are you doing? Like, no, you can't do that. And it ended up being the beginning of a long friendship. So we've collaborated now. But at the beginning, he was like, no, don't even talk to me. I'm an inspector. This is all illegal. But I didn't give up, and did learn a lot of like, oh, this is why they're worried about that. Like, this actually, some things can cause major problems. So there's reasons for these, there's reasons for codes, and some things are overly restrictive and I think not helpful, but other things are. So I learned myself, you know, what the reason behind all the rules, and also worked on changing the codes. Like, first of all, it has to be legal, because if it's not, people are going to do it anyway, and then they'll ignore their cities and their authorities, because it's just common sense to be able to save water. So legalizing Graywater was really important to make it possible for the average person to have a pathway. So I was very active in 2009 to do that. And since then, I've just always tried to make the codes more in line with, always health and safety for people and the planet, and making it not onerous or overly restrictive when it doesn't need to be. And so I'm on the technical advisory committee with the water efficiency standards. That's a national code. So it is really interesting to see people who write these codes. Many of them just have no experience with this. So it's people who do, our responsibility to kind of step up and to join those spaces so we can share like on the ground experience of how these things work, and what's just unnecessary and creates burdens that don't need to be in place.
Yeah. Thank you. Can you still hear me? Yeah. Mm-hmm. You had this advice in your previous webinar to measure your laundry. And when I first listened to that, I thought, oh, that's so ridiculous. But then today I did it, and I had all my buckets as it was coming out, and it was only 12 gallons. So it was so important to do that before my system was installed. It was easy to do. And I mean, it's not a lot of water. It's my brand new washing machine. So thank you for that.
Good job. You did it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Donna. It's really sweet to be able to see you on this webinar. Donna and Mary have been at our previous Graywater installation, so it's a real treat to know that they're still interested and are persevering through all of this. And I really appreciate that question, to hear a little bit more about you, Laura. You really are a pioneer, and I'm so glad we're all able to be learning from you today. So thank you again. And Donna, I really appreciate your question. We've got one good one in the chat from Andrew. Andrew asks, where do mobile home parks fall in regard to single family or multifamily?
That is a great question. So mobile home parks are HCD2. They're not HCD1, and HCD2, I can't remember what they've adopted. My memory is they haven't adopted the Graywater code. I'd have to flip back. I'm gonna stop my screen share and go back and check that, because I've come across people who wanted to do Graywater and weren't able to because they were in a mobile home park and they weren't allowed. Huh. Which, I don't know how to change that particular code, but if that is true, we should be moving on that.
Mobilizing and moving to influence.
Yeah, so HCD2 hasn't adopted most of the code. It is true what I thought. They have not adopted this. And when they haven't adopted it, it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means there's not a good pathway. So they'll often want like an engineer to design the system. And when they put their professional, stamp on it, they take liability over the system. So when there's not a straightforward pathway, then the default is, well, you can't do it unless, or you can do it, but an engineer has to design it, which is just too expensive for most people.
And is that lack of adoption only in California, or is that going to differ like in the state of Oregon, for example?
Yeah, Graywater codes are, what agency is in charge of them is like completely different across the country. So Oregon, the Department of Environmental Quality is in charge. So there's like a state, it's just totally different in each state.
Fair enough.
California.
Laura lives in Oregon, for everybody who's laughing at that. Okay, Vicky is asking a question in the chat. Oops, I just lost it. I believe she was asking a little bit about rebates, and I know we're going to touch on that in just a minute, but she's wondering, is there anything in the works that give homeowners more incentive instead of disincentives to actually invest in gray water systems?
Yeah, there are incentives. Liz is going to talk about those. For permitted systems, some areas have tried to make it easier, like by creating a standard plan or rebating the cost of the permit. Some places are requiring Graywater, new homes to be built with Graywater in mind, called like Graywater ready plumbing. So that's happening a little bit, and I suspect it will happen a lot more. But yeah, there's definitely more room for incentives.
Thank you. So Chip has a question. They ask, what's your opinion on filtration required for pressurized systems? I'll need to pump uphill to irrigate. Are they too burdensome for people to use over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you don't need a drip system, like if you're watering trees or bushes or kind of your larger plants, I would really encourage you to skip the filter, like just have the simple pump system, use the mulch in the landscape that does filter gray water, but it's a filter that you don't have to clean out with your hands, or, it's just a natural in-ground filter. Of course, every system needs some amount of maintenance. There's nothing maintenance free, but these simple systems are like once a year checking in your system versus like a frequent, or even, a couple times a year cleaning out a filter can be a little bit onerous. If you don't have trees and bushes and bigger plants, you have a lot of little plants, that's when you do need a filter, because you need to send gray water through drip and just really spread out small amounts of water. It's going to be a specialized drip. It's going to be drip for dirty water. And I didn't talk about all these tonight because there's just kind of too much in one talk, but there are a lot of details to make sure you get the most likely to succeed filtered system. And yes, the manually cleaned filters are the biggest source of system failure of anything, because people forget. Getting a maintenance contract, that can be a way to make it work. Like someone else on a schedule that's paid is not going to forget, will clean your filter. That definitely can work. And there's a few systems that can work if you really will clean the filter, but you want one that doesn't need very frequent cleaning. Like maybe, I would say if it's more than twice a year, I would definitely not do it. Twice a year, that would probably work.
Interesting. Thank you. Vicky has a raised hand. And let Donna speak. So Vicky, let's see if we can let you speak too. Okay, Vicky, I'm asking you to unmute. There we go.
Actually, this is Vicky's husband, Kurt.
Hello, Kurt.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
The question I was asking is on the permitted systems, you go through the county or city or wherever to get a permit. Ultimately, that goes back to the county and gets assessed on your property taxes for the rest of your days. Is anybody looking into making these systems exempt from that, like they've done with solar systems? Basically, solar systems are non-taxable, except until the later owner. If another person buys it, that second owner ends up paying it.
I don't know. I haven't, in California, I've never heard of a tax exemption or any type of tax consideration.
Yeah, I was just curious if anybody was looking into anything like that, because it can add up. These full systems, end up costing quite a bit of money to put in, which I don't know if you're doing that, but then paying additional taxes on it every year for then on as if it's a home improvement. because they assess it. So I was just curious if you happen to know have heard of anything being looked at that way. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kurt. I think you might have stumped our panelists here, and it's a great point that you're bringing up, and I think it's something that we could have a continued conversation about with some of the folks that we actually work with and have the ability to influence. I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Yep.
We still have a little bit more time for any questions that may be lingering. Laura, I know I had one question in one of your beginning slides when you did display the distribution and how you went to each mulch basin. I'm curious, how do you ensure that half the water is going one way and the other half is going that way? Is it about slope of your pipe, or how do you make sure that the water is being distributed the way that it needs to be?
So you need to come into your flow splitter with a straight run of pipe. There's like 2 feet, at least coming in straight. And then if the flow splitter is flat, it will split evenly. And the pipes coming out of it don't have to have the same angle. The water just moves quicker if it's a steeper slope or less quick. So as long as you keep the flow splitter flat, you'll get an even split of water. How to keep that from not over time, tweaking and moving, there are strategies to do that. Like you place a brick under it, you can wrap it with a wire and drive rebar and attach it to a piece of rebar going down. There's, different things you can do, because if you don't do anything, it will over time kind of sit, move, and then water will come out one side than the other. So with branch drain systems, I have found after several years, sometimes you have to go back and kind of remove those, especially if you haven't used rebar or some other technique to try to hold it stable.
That's a great point. I certainly know in most parts of Petaluma and maybe even Sonoma County as a whole, gophers are the pest of the day. And I think that they could seriously influence or impact a graywater system.
Yeah, I actually learned from Chris Reamer, who is an installer in Sonoma, about what he does with his valve boxes and gophers, because they will just throw that, he drives a big, I don't know if he still, when he told me about this, this is what he did. He would drive a stake down and then screw his valve box to the stake. So it wouldn't, the gophers couldn't, at least they couldn't move it around, because they were just causing a lot of problems.
Oh, how interesting. Yeah, I guess that's the one part of graywater systems where observing your system is incredibly important.
Yeah.
Donna with a raised hand again. I'll unmute you again, Donna.
Just a little detail. I called Wyatt today to price the valve boxes. And are they the 6-inch or the 10-inch, the ones we used on Saturday? The smaller ones, or?
I want to say they might be the 10-inch. What do you, maybe the 6-inch? 6-inch. Okay, they're the 6-inch.
6-inch. They're really affordable. I mean, they said that they would give a discount if you work with Daily Acts, and yeah, I may need like 25 of them and $5. Anyway, they were really willing to help. So yeah, it's good, because the other ones are $11. So it's good to clarify that. So thank you.
That's a good plug for Wyatt, Donna.
One more question. The slide, Laura, about the subsoil and the graywater meeting. Is that basically like saying that it has to be buried 2 inches?
It has to be cut. So the code just says cover. So when your graywater comes out, and that's like where the graywater is coming out. The valve box is a cover. So that means if you're using the valve box with the lid, you're drilling down at least 2 inches. So where your graywater comes in is 2 inches below the top, because you're coming up to the top. Maybe if you want your valve box sticking up a little out of the ground so you can see it, then, well, I guess it's still covering it by 2 inches. You just need it covered by something.
Covered. Okay. 2 inches. Thank you.
And if you're using if it's a laundry to landscape system, and especially if you have a front loader, you can use the 6-inch drain pipe and just cut it yourself. So if you find that you have a whole bunch of outlets to use, that can be a more affordable way, but that doesn't work with a branch drain. So if it's the shower, the bigger pipe, you do need to have the valve box.
Mm-hmm. So I thought that the laundry to landscape was a branch drain.
Those are just terms. So you do kind of branch out in a laundry to landscape, but the term branch drain is describing a system coming from the shower well, it's coming from gravity. So you've tapped into the plumbing, you're using the larger ABS pipe, and you're using gravity to distribute.
And it's probably more water ultimately. Yeah.
It usually is.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. We've got another hand raised from Gisette. Love it.
Okay, I'm the one that asked about Hydroloop, and the reason I did is, you know, basically our yard, we have mostly native oaks that we really don't want to irrigate, and we have do have some small landscaping, and so we were interested mostly in trying to save water for flushing toilets, and I heard you mention rainwater for flushing toilets, but we don't get rain reliably. So I heard that. So what I'm really interested, it's sounding like what we should be pursuing is some type of system to use our showers and tubs and laundry simply to go to some drip systems. And how much savings would we really get from that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there are residential sites that are not suitable for gray water for sure. Many are, but there are some that aren't. So if you do you currently irrigate any parts of your land?
We do, but we use very little because we don't have that many plants, and we don't have a lot of ornamental plants. Mm-hmm. So, you know, there's watering happens maybe once a week during the dry system and during the dry season. And occasionally we have we've had to deep water some of the oaks because, you know, during the drought, but that's just on an infrequent basis, like every few months. Mm-hmm. So that's why, you know, we were really interested in trying to not use drinking water to flush toilets. So we were hoping to reroute the water, but also we're interested in, you know, probably would have some sort of drip system with a filter and a pump. That's why I looked into Hydroloop, because it sounded like it could route water to doing, within the house. Yeah.
Yeah, that is its intention, is to do the inside the house. And it could, if there's extra water, it can go into drip as well. The need for like someone to try out these new systems, like there's definitely a need for that, because how are we ever going to learn new things?
Well, they told me I would be the first person in California to ever even think about it. So, okay, well, you did answer a lot of questions tonight, so thank you very much.
Thank you. I love it. I'm glad we were able to, on the fly, unmute people and have some more organic dialogue. I know for me, it's easier to ask questions that way. I think now it might be an appropriate time to do some of our closing slides. And if there are any additional lingering questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. As we've continued to mention, we are going to be sending a follow-up email with resources and this recording, and we are always here as a resource. We really appreciate everybody for showing up this evening.
Hi, everybody. Can you see my notes?
Nope.
Okay, great. There's no notes, so don't even worry about it. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening, especially Laura and Lauren. We really appreciate it. And all of you who have stayed and remained with us. I just want to finish out our time together with a few resources and outreach opportunities. So we do have a few different ways for you to feel supported with your city or your towns. We're not going to be able to go into all of them, but we just wanted to share with you the ways that you can get involved. If you're not from this area and you don't see your city on here, it's pretty easy to access it on the internet, or if you have any trouble, you're free to contact us. There are ways for you to opt in for graywater reuse. We also have some other upcoming opportunities for our webinars. So we have our one happening November 4th, Growing from the Ground Up, Soil Health. That'll be happening from 5 to 7:30. And then we have another one following November 18th from 5:30 to 7. And this is going to be a garden design workshop or dreamscaping webinar. So you're welcome to attend, and you can go on to our upcoming events on our Daily Acts website. And just, yeah, thank you so much for each and every one of you. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, recipes, you can feel free to email me at corey@dailyacts.org, or if you have any more specific questions, Laura and Lauren. But thank you so much. We'll be signing off for the evening. But just thank you so much. We couldn't do without you all.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate your engagement, and I hope we can continue these conversations and continue to be in touch. Laura and Lauren, thank you for everything. This has been a beautiful partnership, and I'm so glad that we're able to go on this journey with you guys. Thank you, everybody. We'll sign off for now, and you can expect some communication from us very soon.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Nice. Thank you. Good night. Take good care. Talk to you all soon. Have a great evening. Signing off. Take care, everybody.
Bye.